Welcome back. Now, the Competition Commission has imposed some strict conditions on Takealot, and this will make it a bit hard for the leading online Takealot, which we understand is quite dominating on online sales and being anti-competitive. But the Free Market Foundation is now slamming these findings, saying that the restrictions will make it even hard for Takealot to compete with big international players such as Amazon as well as Shein. Well, to explain this even further, we're now joined by Free Market Foundation's legal researcher, Zakhele Mthembu, this morning. Zakhele, thank you so much for your time and a very warm good morning. I suppose let's start with some of the conditions that have been imposed on Takealot, this against, to their disadvantage, against the likes of Amazon as well as Shein.
Yes. At the Free Market Foundation, we have been following the activities of the Competition Commission quite closely. And we are of the opinion that, not only our local commission in South Africa, but global antitrust policies miss a fundamental aspect of what makes a free market, which is an ability to contest in a market. So the South African Competition Commission thinks that if a company grows to be big enough, as is chosen by consumers, it can then be said to be dominant, even though there is still an ability for a competitor to contest that market, not inhibited by the company that supposedly is dominant, according to the Commission. We are opposed to this. We think that it is a way of punishing successful businesses, right? Because companies like Takealot have been willingly chosen by South African consumers. And if our regulators come after the fact and tell us that the company has grown too big, mind you, thanks to choices that were made by South Africans, then it means that our regulators are, being paternalistic and undermining us. And much more important, they are undermining the economic growth of the country, because how do you invest in an economy whereby if you get successful by being patronized by customers, you will be punished by regulators? And as you have hinted on, this will impact the ability of online retailers like Takealot to compete in a quite competitive online retail field, whereby there's Shein, there's Amazon that already, have a share of the market. So if our South African regulators are going to undermine our South African companies, it does not bode well, whichever way you choose to slice it.
Yeah. Is that why you've referenced the latest action by the Competition Commission as destructive interference? I found that to be quite, a very strong stance that you've taken there, Zakhele. Why do you think so?
We think it is destructive interference because, as I have said, the online retail space is highly competitive. The e-commerce sector in South Africa is one of the biggest e-commerce sectors. This is worldwide, bigger than, much more developed economies like Singapore. So we are doing something right, as is shown by the success of Takealot and other, e-commerce entities in South Africa. So when the Competition Commission is going to come after having established this big, growth that happened outside of its regulatory interference and not to come after the fact, then that will surely create problems. And given the recommendations that the Competition Commission has instituted, they will fundamentally change how a company like Takealot conducts its business, right, with its reference to self-preferencing and them being barred from doing that. That will be destructive, because if something has an effect on how a company, conducts its business, that will definitely have an effect on revenue and subsequently a downstream effect on the size of the e-commerce sector. That is one of the, few successful South African industries that we still have left, given the horrible state of our economy.
Yeah. Zakhele, under the same breath, why is it important, do you think, as you've also equally suggested, for the Competition Commission to heed the call from the South African Reserve Bank to avoid regulated prices and also overly regulated markets?
It is extremely important. And, I am personally not the biggest fan of the Reserve Bank, but I get to agree with them in this instance when they say that regulators should play their part. In South Africa, we're experiencing inflation that hasn't been seen in over decades. So if there's something that the government can do to try and offset, any potential rise in prices, because the more regulations there are, the more companies spend on compliance, and that cost will eventually be passed down to consumers. So the Reserve Bank was correct in saying that the government, if it can, it should reduce the amount of regulations that it has on businesses, because that will have a direct downstream effect on, those costs for complying with those regulations being passed down to consumers. The Competition Commission seems to have not heeded that. I recently just read that, they are continuing their case against against a South African airway company, I think Come or something. I forgot the name of the exact airline, but it was for price regulation. And price regulation, this is something that's been settled in economic literature for a very long time. If you regulate prices and if you let any other mechanism outside of the market regulate prices, you are going to run into shortages. We are already experiencing this to an extent in South Africa with Eskom and the regulated prices through NERSA that we live with in South Africa, and that has definitely created shortages because prices are a signal to the market, and if they are impacted by any other entity but those involved in making that transaction, then they will send false signals to the market, and that will create much more bigger problems down the line. So the Competition Commission should heed the call of the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, I mean, under the same breath, I just wonder if it's also only isolated to Takealot, or is it just e-commerce companies in general, where, as you've mentioned, we're seeing almost the Competition Commission focusing on, what you also term as punishment for being successful, for being profitable, for growing, and also for diversifying.
I wouldn't say it is limited to e-commerce alone. As I alluded to earlier, this is a thinking that is prevalent across all antitrust or competition law globally. This is a thinking that if consumers patronize a company that starts out small and they choose to, deal with that company or buy whatever that company sells, and that company grows to be large enough after consumers have chosen it in their masses, then regulators will come and say that that company is dominant and abusing its dominance for one reason or the other. This is within a context of there being an ability for a competitor, should they wish to come and contest in that particular market. Now, the regulators confuse the difficulty of contesting in a market that has been established and that has people who already have preferences in that market with an inability to contest, right? They equate it to a monopoly. Companies like Takealot are taken to be abusing that dominance for no other reason but for the mere fact that they are big and for the mere fact that they are patronized by consumers. So it does not only extend to e-commerce, it extends to every sector that is investigated by the Competition Commission, which means every sector of the economy. If a company grows large enough, given the inherently subjective standards that competition law in South Africa and all across the globe uses, the company will be found to have abused its dominance, even though when it started, it did not do anything differently than when it started operating. Just the difference is that it has succeeded. It has been chosen by consumers, and now the state is coming to punish it.
Yeah, you remind me of what former Naspers CEO Rob van Dijk also reiterated, saying that he is quite concerned, or at least he was at the time, and I'm sure he continues to be concerned, that it seems authorities are focusing and almost targeting local businesses, putting them at a disadvantage in comparison to your international companies like your Amazon and Shein. Obviously conceding that when you think about Amazon, they've got 1,000 more, financial muscle, such as, in comparison to a Takealot. What could be the possible next steps here then for Takealot, do you think? Also perhaps even legally?
Legally, I hope that Takealot would have opposed the final reports of the online intermediation platforms market inquiry. They do have the latitude to oppose that, so I would have hoped that they have opposed it, and the matter will be taken to the Competition Tribunal. Although, if one were to read, past cases of the Competition Tribunal, they are guided by the statute itself, and depending on how one would interpret the competition law, it can either be good or bad for Takealot. But the next step should be to, of course, just oppose the findings and try and fight as hard as you can to keep your business model, because this is particularly concerning in an era where Amazon is about to enter the South African market formally, and Takealot is being undercut by our own South African regulators instead of trying to remove as many barriers as possible to make their success that much more easier to attain. So I think they should oppose the report, and we'll see from there the proceedings from the Competition Tribunal.
A pleasure talking to you, Zakhele. Thank you so much for your time right here on eNCA. Zakhele Mthembu, a legal researcher at the Free Market Foundation, talking to us about some of the findings from the Competition Commission, which he dubs as destructive interference, placing a much more disadvantage on local companies such as Takealot. This, of course, in comparison to the likes of Amazon and Shein.